Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, why the best writers risk being strange. And I'm talking today with Øystein Brager. And Øystein, can you tell us a little bit, for starters, about your audio fiction podcast, The Amelia Project?
Sure. I'm one of the two co-creators of the Amelia Project, together with a guy named Philip Thorne, Pip. And we write a show called the Amelia Project, which is a kind of dark comedy podcast about a death-faking agency. So the basic premise of the show is that in every episode, we'll meet a new client who comes into this underground organization with some kind of problem. They've gotten themselves into trouble somehow, and they need to get out of it. And the only route left to them is to fake their death and start life over from the start. So every episode is the kind of vetting interview where our main character, which is just called the interviewer, is a mysterious gentleman, will interview the client and figure out, okay, why do you need to disappear? What kind of bespoke disappearance can we give you? And what kind of new life can you set you up with? And through that, we explore a lot of different themes and delve into some quite absurd and comical situations.
I think it's also worth noting for people who might not realize from that description that it's a podcast that also will delve into science fiction and very absurdist sort of scenarios. So like, even though it's, people who want to fake their own death, I mean, that can range from, a cult leader, all the way to like an alien at Area
Yeah.
51. It's very, quite a wide range of figures. And what I like about the sort of core premise of that, in when I first heard about this core premise, one thing that really appealed to me about the core premise is it seems just so naturally to fit into the structure of a podcast. You're doing these interviews, so it
Mm.
really is, like an interview. And I mean, you produce it more fully, so it is like a kind of audio theatrical experience. And sometimes there's other characters involved, and you've got sound effects and all sorts of things. So it's a pretty produced
Sure.
podcast in that way. And as you say, it kind of, in a sense, it's more like listening to audio fiction in a kind of normative sense. But I also appreciate how it has this interesting structure that's very akin to like a podcast show. Like, it's of course, the conceit here is that this is all happening secretly, but it's not too far off what you might hear if, like,
Mm.
Joe Rogan was the interviewer, like, and we're having like a discussion about like why you want to fake your own death, and what's the backstory there, what's the reasoning, and so on. It's a very clever blend of that audio fiction format and the podcast format, uh, and centered around that, kind of absurdist story premise.
Yeah, I think Pep and I are really into this. We really appreciate this thought that audio drama um, lends itself to dialogue. And great dialogue, great conversations. The audio format really allows you to listen to the words. It really allows you to see the things that the characters are describing. And of course, a lot of audio drama leans very heavily on sound design, and we do in some of our episodes more than others. But the fact that just two people talking can really transport you to another world and really take you on a journey is something that, in its simplicity, that we really appreciate and we really like playing with.
So can you talk a bit more about how that format for the show and that kind of basic premise, that idea developed, and a little bit about how maybe you come to work with your partner there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the second question first. Philip and I studied theatre directing together at Roast Bruford College in London. So that's where we met, and we started our company, Imploding Fictions, when we were in our final year of Roast Bruford. And so for many years, we produced theatre productions and performances, performance theatre of various kind, traveled around Europe with it. And then Pip and I found ourselves living in two different cities. I'd moved back to my native Norway, back to Oslo. Pip had moved to Paris and got married. So we needed to figure out a different way of working together, being in the same space. You kind of need to be in the same space to create theatre. So we started figuring out, okay, how can we collaborate online and keep our creative collaboration going? And that's how we sort of stumbled upon audio drama. Um, and now we've kind of fallen very deeply in love with that medium. And the premise of the Amelia Project was born sitting in a cafe in London. Both of us had kind of flown in, and we were meeting up, and we were discussing various different ideas that could work for a audio drama. And I think one of the things that attracted us to uh, doing the Amelia Project and not one of the all the other ideas that we were brainstorming that day is exactly what you were hitting upon. This thing of it being so close to the kind of talk show podcast format, the fact that it's got this simplicity of just two people in a room and let us just focus on what they're saying and who they are and why they're saying it, and kind of get engaged in a story that way. Um, and I think that to us was both creatively fulfilling. The simplicity of that was kind of a neat conceptual idea that we really enjoyed, and got excited by. In addition to, of course, being easy to produce. A more fully fledged audio drama, as some of the other ideas were, would have been much more complicated to produce off the bat, when we were kind of just starting out in this format. Now we've moved into, the show's developed, and other characters and other storylines have kind of crept into it. So it's more complex now than it was then, but it was a great place to start.
Can you talk a bit about the actual writing process that you have for an episode? I mean, I could imagine if I was writing this show with a partner, especially, one of the things that I would probably do is just come up with a character and start improvising, record that improvisation, and then start building a script off that. Now, that's just my sort of imagination of how I might do it. What's your actual process? Is it approximating that in any way? Do you do improvisation to get into that character, or do you just have a pretty straightforward, typical process? Like, what does writing a show look like for you?
I don't know what a typical way of doing it would look like. I really only know what Pip and I do. But it's a process of sending ideas back and forth. Most of the time, we will plan out, our season first. So we'll know what the kind of overarching kind of structure of the season is going to be. But within that, we've obviously still got all of these different individual clients and individual stories that just sort of span one episode. Each client comes in and leaves at the end of the episode, and that's the kind of complete journey, the complete arc of that one character. And so we'll just bat around ideas. I mean, Pip and I have got like a messenger thread, a WhatsApp thread, an email thread, and then phone calls, like going all at the same time with different ideas for different episodes, all at once. And we'll just kind of play around with, like, I think this could be a fun character. This is an inspiration I got from something I read in the paper. Wouldn't it be exciting if, and that's how it starts. And then at some point, one of us will kind of go, I think I want to give that particular idea a bash. Like, I think that's the thing that excites me the most right now. I'll sit down and give that a first draft. And then, yeah, we'll start working on it. Sometimes we'll be able to kind of work out a full kind of first draft and then send it to the other person to kind of give notes or do story editing, and it goes back and forth that way. Occasionally, and this is actually maybe one of the most fun experiences, is when when it's more difficult, when you get halfway through an episode, or you kind of got the beginning and the end, or you've got just bits and pieces here and there, and there's something about the idea, but it doesn't quite come out. And then I'll, if I'm in that situation, I'll send it to Pip and I'll be like, I'm stuck. Can you take over? And then he'll dive in, and then he'll write, some more bits and pieces, and then he'll send it back to me. And that process of really kind of just entering into each other's mind and kind of building on each other's ideas, is one of the most fulfilling experiences, I think.
A lot of my audience is writers, and so I wonder if we could dive a little bit more fully into this collaborative writing process, because
Sure.
one thing I haven't really had too many people talk about is just the actual process of writing, not just oneself, but as part of a writing team,
Mm.
in that sort of way. And then I'm curious if you just talk a little bit more about just some of the just practical ways that you approach. So you've got all these different threads where you're discussing the ideas, for example. But then are you pretty much, sharing a document, like what are some of the sort of practical ways that you're um, getting into that? Uh, you talked a little bit about it, but I just want him you could talk a bit
Yeah,
more
sure.
fully about what you do when things are going well or when there's a problem that arises.
I mean, in kind of just simply practical terms, we share a Dropbox. Yeah, um, thing that we've got shared documents. We work in the same program, Fade In, so we can open the same documents. Uh, so we will write in each other's documents, and we try to be quite strict with always if we cut a lot, if we go into an episode somebody else has written and we want to take stuff away that we don't think works, that we save that as a copy and then move forward with a new copy of that document, just in case the other person just goes, you know what, I really like that bit and I want it back in again, and I have a reason for it, and I can prove to you that it works and it's good. So we don't lose anything. So at the end of the day, even though we're working in the same document, there'll be multiple copies in a folder just called old drafts, and we can always go kind of back and pick things out. If there's like, actually that one line you wrote was really funny, I need to find that, we can go back and find it. So that's how it works sort of practically. um
You
and in
mentioned
terms of, yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead.
you mentioned just to dig into that just a little bit more. So you mentioned fade in.
Yeah,
Do you lock pages in that at some point so that the other person's revisions are starred, or do you have any sort of process with how you use that particular software, or are you just using it because you like screenwriting format?
we basically just use it because we like the screenwriting format. So it's a process of just yeah, changing and revising. We don't really follow revisions, and I think, I don't know if it's necessary, at least in our writing process, because I think when you read the new draft, the important thing is to see what's there, not what used to be there, and to see what the other person has written and how it all flows together, and not what you thought about when you wrote the first draft that didn't work. So I think in order to kind of always move forward, just having the latest draft in front of you is actually the most useful for us, I find.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. It reminds me of something I do. I mean, I also use fade in for my screenwriting and stuff, but I'll do something in when I'm writing a book, like a poetry book or short story collection or whatever. If I'm working on a novel draft or something where I'm in Word at a certain point, but I'm getting all my edits in Word as track changes. One of the things that I do as a sort of standard practice is I just accept all the changes without looking at them.
Right.
And then I start reading through the document. And if I notice something is weird and off, usually that's a change I probably shouldn't have accepted. But I like by default just accepting everything that the editor or the writing partner is giving back to me, and just as you say, deal with how it looks now. If maybe I'll undo something they did, but it's going to be a natural flow of what works or doesn't work here, rather than I want to preserve my little thing that I had before or what have you. I find it is a way to get out of that thought process. So it's interesting to me that you have sort of similar attitude or approach when you're working with a partner in that way.
Yeah, because I think it is about always just moving forward, and it's about always just getting the feel for what's on the page. Does it flow? Does it work? Does it make sense? Does it have the emotional logic? Does each character's journey have the emotional logic that needs to be there? And I think the only way to really feel that is to read it every time. Read it as the way you would. Um, I mean, both Pip and I are directors, so I think, and writers, but I think we read as directors and then go back, like we kind of change hats all the time. So I think I read as a director whenever I read something, even if it's an unfinished draft, because then I know, what would I do with this moment, how would I make it work. That's the sort of analysis that's going on. And if something doesn't work, then if I stumble across something, then I know, okay, well, here's a moment where
That directing point of view is
it's,
really important too, I think. And I think it's a useful tool for writers to think like directors in that way, because the script isn't the
yeah,
thing. The script is a blueprint. It's like a screenplay, an audio script in that same way. As you say, you're going to make the choices during the performance or during the direction, during the production. The audience doesn't see that script, and that's the thing that I find sticks uh, with writers too much when they're in these collaborative mediums. They'll often get hung up on how the words are going to sound. It's like, well, nobody's going to read those words. Even the actor, saying the dialogue might change that dialogue to make it flow a little better or fit or just drop it or whatever, depending on the situation, and they're often right to do so. And so it's easy, I think, to get hung up in that um, writerly mode of really fixating on exactly what words go where. At the same time, I wonder how you handle it when you and your partner have a disagreement about where this character or this story should go. Like, what's the sort of practical approach to resolving those issues?
Well, we're not in the same city, so we can't meet up and beat each other up. So we got to find other ways of doing it. No, we wouldn't anyway. But I think it's just a matter of discussing and discussing at length and trying to kind of articulate as best you can why you feel the way you do. And most of the time, I think, I mean, neither Pip or I are particularly precious about what we write. So it's very rarely that, I mean, the discussion might go on for a little bit back and forth, just so that we sort of sound out all the arguments before we make a choice. But then a lot of the time, I mean, some of the time, one of us will then go, "Oh, actually, I see your point now that I've heard it. Sure, let's do what you say," or both of us will say the same thing and just go, I don't actually care which way we go. You make a choice." So I think this idea of just not being particularly precious about what we write, but to think it through properly is kind of what we do. We have had moments. We have had a very, very few kind of moments where we've not been able to kind of to really reach an agreement, and where, and I think at that point what ended up being in the script is a sort of the diplomatic solution where we sort of try to meet halfway, and it isn't the best. That's never, those moments are never the best. The best moments are when we just say, okay, I understand why you want to do it your way, then let's go fully with that way of doing it. And then if that has repercussions for other lines, other moments in the script, then they have to follow the decision that we now made.
Can you talk a bit more about writing a season? You mentioned that you often will come up with a season sort of structuring prior to really getting the episodes locked in a manner. And I'm curious to know like what that looks like, particularly for a show where in some ways it is a sort of one-off episode, although you have that continuing story of the Amelia Project itself and the interviewer as a recurring character. I mean, I'm curious to know sort of how you handle approaching a season or thinking about the season as a unit of story.
Yeah, I thought a lot about this before our interview, actually, to try and kind of formulate what it is exactly that we do, and put words to it. Because I know what we do, but I'm not sure we've kind of formulated it before. Now the thing is, the show, as we spoke about, it starts in a very kind of procedural format: one episode, one interview, one client, move on to the next. Now, as the show progresses, more and more kind of overarching story, a serialized story kind of creeps in and starts kind of taking up as much space. After a few seasons, it takes up about as much space as the actual interviews, even though we never let that interview format go. That's the core of the show. There's also another longer arc, or several longer arcs that have been built in. So um, I think our approach actually to writing a season is quite different to how a lot of other series would approach their season, um, because uh, we start. I mean, we start in the first season with it being very procedural. Then in the very last episode of season one, there's a big reveal. Suddenly, there's a click. Somebody stopped the tape, and we hear two MI5 agents discussing what the interview that we've just heard. And we suddenly realize, okay, everything we've heard up to now in season one has been tapes that are now in the hands of the MI5. So suddenly we've introduced new characters. We've introduced a framing device that then becomes the framing device for all of season two, which is every so often these MI5 agents will stop the tape and talk about what they've heard. We shift time. we think we're in the present in each interview in season 1, but then suddenly the interviews are actually in the past on the tape in season 2. So there's a lot that kind of shifts from season 1 to season 2. It's a different mode of storytelling in a way. So even though the core idea is the same, we've changed mode. And then we do the same thing again when we move into season 3, because at the end of season 2, there's another cliffhanger. I'm just going to do all the plot spoilers here because your listeners are writers. They probably don't mind. But then these two MI5 agents call the Amelia Project and give them an ultimatum. Either we get all of your clients, all of your information, and let you go. You can go if you give us everything you know about every criminal that you've ever helped escape. Or we bust down your door and we arrest you. We're standing outside your offices. And the Amelia Project has got a choice. Do they trust the MI5 or do they think it's a bluff and that they're going to arrest them anyway? So season 3, they decide it's probably a bluff. We need to run. So that sees the Amelia Project on the run. Now, being on the run while still doing interviews, now that's a completely different mode of storytelling. Again, suddenly it's a kind of action film format that's sort of blended into this idea of just the two people in a room interview thing. So that those two things sort of mash together and create a new mode of storytelling again. And I think actually, because our show is about storytelling, I think we really love this idea of finding different ways in each season of telling story. And it seems entirely logical to us that it needs to progress the way it does. But compared to a lot of other shows that you see on TV, for example, and also in audio drama, where it's the same core cast, they're just in a slightly different situation from season to season, we like shifting the way in which we tell the story from season to season, building on the premise that we've already got, but also saying, hey, we can do something new with these characters and the way that their story is being told.
Um, let's just pause for a second so I can just define a few things for people who maybe aren't as familiar with some of the terms that you and I are kind of talking about here. So just really quickly for people listening, when he's talking about a series or a serial is a show that has continuing storyline, where if you aired the episodes out of order, they wouldn't make sense. Whereas a series purely is, a show where if you air the episodes out of order, like if you listen to episode 5, then episode 2, then episode 7, it just still is fine and makes sense because they're self-contained. And then when he mentions procedural, that's a certain type of show. Usually it's a series show where every episode has a really particular format. Often it's kind of like, the crime of the week. You see the murder, then they start solving the murder, and the characters are going through a particular procedure, like, a crime investigation is the normal example. In this case, it's like an interview format. And you've got that kind of, again, that sort of way that the show is progressing is sort of formula. And the way that, the characters are doing things is sort of formulaic in terms of the nature of their job, although like each episode can be very different. So just to kind of make sure people are clear on the terms you're talking about. Now, what, Øystein's saying here for people listening is, here's a show that really begins with more of the normal series procedural format, really kind of pure in the sense that theoretically you could be listing these things out of order and it all makes perfect sense. And they are self-contained. You can just dive into like a random one and it's a full story. But you've added progressively, it sounds like, these serial elements, this continuing storyline aspect that is getting more and more deep and developed, while it's still something that people could theoretically just jump in. So often that's people see this happening more on television than they used to, where there's these serial elements that start to creep into an otherwise pure series. The gamble of that type of show approach is, of course, one, people could still jump into the show at any point because it is kind of series driven in its structure. But two, if you're following the thing, there's this deeper level where, it just makes more sense. You have more of a connection to it and so on. And then you're saying for you as a writers, there's also this level at which, thematically, this is a show that is about storytelling on a certain level. And here's this kind of meta level where it starts to reflect back on itself and sort of develop and twist its themes without, losing what makes it what it is, which is, this interview show where you could just listen to one episode in isolation and it makes sense and it's fine and it's a good experience. So what I'm curious about with all of sort of how that show is developing and how you're kind of handling all that is, um, where did you kind of develop the skills to really pull off something complicated like this? Because could you talk a bit more about some of the projects you have done together with imploding fictions before you got to this point? Because this is actually, I know it sounds, I just broke it down really fast there. This is a lot of complicated things that you're doing,
Yeah.
especially, and if somebody doesn't know a lot about screenwriting or script writing, like if you know if they're out there listening, they may not know exactly like how difficult what you're talking about is.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily an approach that I would recommend people doing when they start out. But I mean, it's the first, long form thing that Pip and I have produced. So of course, we're also finding our feet with it, and we've been learning as we've gone along writing this show. But the fact that we started with this sort of, like I said, procedural format, the interview each time, and then very gradually and very slowly brought in these longer stories meant that we could, I think, hone our skills as we were writing. Um, and then, of course, we were working on other kind of side writing projects and things along the way to kind of to also keep developing as writers. Um, but yeah, as you said, we've have worked together for years. You know, Pip and I have worked together since we started our company in 2007, and we've done a lot of theater shows. And so I think, and you know, a lot of them have been based on new writing. You know, we've collaborated with writers, other writers who've written shows for us. So the idea of kind of developing something from scratch and to have a very strong kind of conceptual idea before you head into a project that frames what you're trying to do has always been at the core of what Pip and I are interested in. So one example is to show the predictions that we did in 2014. So the core concept that to about what would happen on a randomly chosen date in 2014. And he started exactly 1 year before that date. And every day he was going to write one prediction about what will happen on this particular date. And he sent us the predictions that he'd written, like we were kind of asking him to be Nostradamus for this particular date. And after he'd sent us the text, he wasn't allowed to look at it again. So, of course, a year goes by, we have 365 predictions. And on the date that we've set, Sami flew into Oslo and went on stage in a theater that we had booked to read all of his predictions out loud, one by one, 365 of them. So that's the core concept of that show, is a very kind of strict idea of how the writing is going to happen, what the kind of end product is. It's a very kind of limited and constrained idea, and which is what excites us to what inside of these really strict limits, what can come out of that. Then what Philip and I did as directors, we directed a show that would happen around him. We directed an event that Sami knew nothing about, where we'd gone through all of these predictions, all of these texts, and said, which things in these texts can we make happen? Which things where can we make the opposite happen so his prediction doesn't come true? And of course, some of his predictions were much more kind of poetic. I mean, there were predictions in there about the ghost of Elvis, and there was little we could do about the ghost of Elvis returning. But then there were other predictions that said that he would leave the theater at one point and go cut off a finger of a famous statue in Oslo. Now, of course, we can have him, leave the theater and come back with something that seems to be the finger of the statue. So we would give him, and Sami knew nothing about this, so he would be given kind of instructions during the show about what to do and how to act. And we would, other actors would come on stage, we'd bring on costumes for him, there were lighting changes, there was all sorts of things happening around him that were born out of the things that he'd written, but he had absolutely no idea they would happen when he went on stage. So that went on for, I think the show lasted for about 4.5 hours. And I think, yeah, so that idea of kind of having a very strict format, but then doing something that's very much kind of rebelling against the norm. The norm is that the actor knows what's going to happen when they go on stage. The actor knew nothing. The show happened to him. The norm is the actor learns the lines before they go on stage. Well, he'd forgotten what he wrote 365 days ago. So we break all of these different kind of norms and challenge them, whilst at the same time have a very kind of rigid directorial concept.
I love that predictions idea. I wrote a book years ago called Clockfire, which is my most popular book, and the idea of Clockfire is plays that are impossible to produce. So each one is kind of a Fluxus like happening description, and and it was very much the writing of it was very much that kind of process of like, okay, well, what normally happens in the theater? Well, normally the actor knows what's going to happen. Well, in this case, let's make the actor not know what's going to happen. I had,
Yeah.
well, normally the audience, the Clockfire, the title Clockfire comes from the title play, which is the audience, the curtain parts, the curtain rises, and there's just a clock on stage that's telling you the correct time. The audience is looking at the clock while the actors sneak outside and set the theater on fire. And so that's the play, as the audience is burning alive, watching their last moments tick away. And I thought, of course, you could, in fact, enact that play. No one would, but you could produce that play. It's not technically impossible. And then I started to get into like, well, what if you stabbed each member of the audience one by one? At what point would they think it was still a play? And at what point would they think these are all
Yeah.
actors that are planted? At some point it tips over, and that tipping point is sort of where the play ends. And then there's also these ways you could break the laws of physics. One of the plays is you go back before life on Earth arises and you prevent it from arising. So of course, how do you enact that play? But it was very much that kind of thought process of like trying to turn the machinations of the theater inside out in this way. I'm curious to know, like, obviously you're not doing everything with that kind of approach, but to what degree have you brought that ethos of trying to deconstruct or alter the kind of standard way of doing things into the Amelia Project?
Well, I think first of all, like I said, each season brings with it a new way of telling the story. And I think so that's the first thing that we do is kind of looking at our own format and going, well, let's deconstruct what we're doing. Let's set ourselves a new challenge with the next season. Secondly, I think within particular episodes, we can go much more in sort of detail in really challenging the audio format. So there are obviously things that, you quote unquote, can't or shouldn't do in an audio play. Rules of thumb like you should not have 15 characters in a scene that you've never met before. Nobody will know who they are, what they're talking about. It is going to be confusing, so nobody does it. So we thought, okay, well, let's do it. So in one of our episodes, the client or clients are the Royal Shakespeare Company. So the entire Royal Shakespeare Company comes into the interviewer's office and, in fact, speak using only quotes from Shakespeare. So we have 15 characters in a room. Nobody knows who they are. Well, they kind of do because, Polonius and Gertrude, some of our listeners will be familiar names, but it's still kind of a thing you're not supposed to do. And we wanted to see, well, can it be done? Can we pull it off? Can it still be a fun and engaging episode? A different example is our episode that's called Pretzel. Another thing you can't do or shouldn't do in audio drama is a kind of in and out of doors type farce. That style of comedy where people are kind of running in and out of doors and hiding in cupboards and getting confused. People are hiding and they're confused. Identities are being mixed up and all of that stuff. That's not something that you do in audio because if you've got too many characters and too many doors in and out and too many scenes, it gets confusing. How are you going to keep track of who's where if you haven't got the visual medium? So we thought, okay, well, let's try it. Let's see if we can do it. Let's see if it does if it is possible. So I think that those are the ways, those are the things that we look for. Not in every episode, but every so often, we're going to do an episode that goes, let's try this thing that people says you shouldn't do and just see if we can kind of crack that puzzle, as it were.
I love that idea. The Shakespeare one really appeals to me. I once read a short story where this character is trying to get fired. One of the things he does to try and get fired is he just starts, all he does is he will only speak in Shakespeare quotes. of course, but one of the frustrations he has is half of the conversation people don't realize that because of course people are always quoting Shakespeare without realizing it. And it just sounds like normal, talk for us at least a certain period of the time. So you talk a bit about the crowdfunding approach, like how you've used crowdfunding to grow the show, and sort of how and that kind of audience interaction that, of course, is so important in the theater, and especially online where we have this kind of world where we can get at the audience more directly. We can have the audience again respond to us more directly than historically has been possible. I'm curious to know a little bit about just the logistics of how you and your audience interact, and again, just practicalities of how you've used crowdfunding.
Yeah, our main source of income, and our one of the most important platforms for kind of engaging with our fans is Patreon, patreon.com. So for those who don't know about it, it's a platform where artists of any kind really can put out what they create, and then their patrons will support them with either a monthly donation or a donation per artwork that you put out. So musicians use it, painters use it, digital artists, all sorts of different artists use it. And so our patrons will pay a sum that they choose on one of our kind of tiers of being a patron for each episode that we put out. And it's been an incredibly important, I mean, it is the main way we fund the show in addition to ad sales. But it's also a really important place to engage with our audience. Um, and it's been a hugely successful for us. I know a lot of audio drama creators use Patreon, but I think we've done things quite differently to a lot of other people. And one of the reasons why we have quite a kind of large conversion rate, like our conversion rate between listeners of the show and supporters is a lot higher than for some other shows. We've got sort of statistics showing that we do better. And I think the reason why we do better is because we produce and put out high quality content, bonus content. We put a lot of time and money and effort into producing extra content for the people who support us. So the idea with audio drama and podcasting is, of course, like with when people use Patreon, often people have this idea that people will give you money to pay for the episode that you put out for free as a podcast. They want to support you to make the thing that you already made because they understand that you need an income to make the thing and they want to support you. So a lot of people kind of sort of surf that wave and don't really do very much on Patreon at all. They might put out the kind of an update between seasons and and that's it kind of thing. The occasional kind of live show behind the scenes or whatever. We have kind of found a structure where we put out additional content in like our show will, when we're in season, when we're releasing episodes, we'll release episodes every 2 weeks. Every off week there will be a big piece of bonus content, and most of the time it'll be audio. So more audio content in universe with the characters that our fans already love and they want more of. And I think that's when people kind of cotton on to the fact that you get value for money, people stay. We can build our patron base, and people really enjoy it. And then also there's the interaction, of course, when talking to people via Patreon, having discussion, with our fans, so that we're accessible as creators. We're human beings. We're not kind of faceless somebody's somewhere. We're Øystein and Pip making this show. That, of course, there are other social media platforms that are also very important for us. Tumblr is very important to us. We've got a lot of fans there. Twitter is really important to us, and Instagram is really important to us. And we try to engage with people on all these different platforms and have an actual dialogue, with people out there.
So what's the best way for people to kind of connect with you, connect with the Amelia Project, or even, find your Patreon?
I mean, the best place to start is ameliapodcast.com. You'll find, the link to our show. You'll find our RSS feed. You'll find the link to Patreon. Anything you need is on our website. So ameliapodcast.com is the first place to go. And then, of course, look us up on Twitter or Instagram or Tumblr, whichever platform you use, and check out the discussions and the interactions that go on there, because we do really love talking to our fans. We do really appreciate. I mean, I thought about one thing earlier actually when you said like that people, you can engage very directly with your audience in the theater. That's really interesting because one of the things we were scared of when we moved from theater and into audio drama, where we thought we love applause. We're theater people, of course we love applause. We love that moment, talking to our audience after the show is over or in the break, or meeting our fans live, or well, meeting our audience live. Let's not use the word fans, because back then, we traveled all around Europe. We didn't have fans. We had audience members. Now, the thing that surprised us and delighted us when we moved into the audio drama sphere was that the level of audience engagement is much, much higher than in the theater. In the theater, people come, they see the show, they leave. They talk about you in the bar, afterwards. In the audio drama world, people will send you messages on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and they will become patrons, and they will have a dialogue with you, and they'll make fan art. We'd never had this theater makers. We've never had anybody make fan art. Now there's lots of people out there who draw their own versions of what they think our characters look like, which is incredible. So the level of audience engagement and personal connection to our audience is much, much bigger in the audio drama space. And that's something that we find incredibly rewarding and humbling and amazing.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me. Again, people check out ameliapodcast.com, and thanks again for talking to me. Thanks for talking to all of us here, and keep writing the wrong way.